Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at sound.
Sound.
It's something that we experience literally every day, but most of us never really stop to think about, how it actually works.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how much we take it for granted.
Yeah.
It's something that is constantly shaping our perception of the world, influencing our emotions, even our actions.
Right.
And yet, most of us have no idea about all the intricate mechanisms that are behind it.
Yeah, you sent me over some really great material this time, and I'm really excited to get into it. One of the things that really blew my mind was just this little fact that our ears never stop growing.
It's wild.
Yeah, apparently it's all because of gravity and collagen, changes over time. That's fascinating. But I guess before we get into how we hear sound, we kind of have to start with what is sound?
Well, at its most basic level, it's a form of energy that travels in waves.
Okay.
You can think of it as like a pulse of energy moving through a medium like air.
Okay, so is it kind of like those ocean waves that we see crashing on the shore?
It's a little different. Those are what we call transverse waves.
Okay.
So it's moving up and down perpendicular to the direction that the wave's traveling in.
Okay.
Sound waves are what we call longitudinal waves. So the vibration is going back and forth in the same direction that the wave is traveling.
Okay.
So you can almost picture it like a slinky where each molecule is bumping into the next to create this chain reaction.
I get it. Okay, so that means that sound needs some sort of medium to travel through.
Absolutely. Sound can travel through air, water, or even solids.
Okay.
But it needs something for those vibrations to pass through. So like in the vast emptiness of space, there's no air, so there's no sound.
Right, so that's why all the spaceship battles in movies.
Totally silent.
Yeah, that always bothered me a little bit.
Yeah, the science backs that up.
Yeah, good. Okay, so back here on Earth then, how fast does sound actually travel?
Well, it really depends on the medium. So in air at room temperature, sound travels at about 343 meters per second,
Okay.
which is pretty fast. But it's still slow enough that we notice a delay between seeing something and hearing the sound.
So when you see a firework explode in the sky and then a little bit later you hear it?
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, if we go to a denser medium, like water, sound travels much faster, about 4 times faster than in air.
Oh, wow.
This is because the molecules are packed closer together so the vibrations can pass through more quickly.
Okay, so if you were swimming underwater,
Yeah.
you would hear something sooner than you would if you were above the water.
You got it. And in even denser mediums, like solid sound can travel unbelievably fast.
Wow.
Like in steel, sound can reach speeds of over 5,000 meters per second.
So speaking of speed, what about those sonic booms? I've heard about those. What causes that super loud sound?
So sonic booms happen when an object, like a supersonic jet, breaks the sound barrier, meaning it's moving faster than the speed of sound itself. What happens is the object is actually outrunning its own sound waves.
Wow.
So all those waves get compressed together, forming a shock wave that we hear as a really loud boom.
So it's like the sound is lagging behind, struggling to keep up with the object?
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It's a really cool demonstration of the relationship between speed and sound.
I get it.
But now let's actually look at some of the properties of sound waves themselves.
Yeah.
The things that determine how we actually perceive a certain sound.
Okay. Right. Because not all sounds are created equal. I mean, some are high-pitched, some are low-pitched, some are loud, some are soft. What is it that determines that?
Well, this is where frequency, wavelength, and amplitude come in.
Okay.
Let's start with frequency, which is measured in hertz.
Okay.
This refers to the number of sound waves that pass a point in 1 second.
So more waves per second would mean a higher pitch then?
A higher pitch, exactly. Think about a high-pitched whistle versus like a low rumble.
Okay.
The whistle has a much higher frequency, many more waves crammed into that 1 second than that low rumble.
That makes sense. And so is that also then why different musical instruments sound so distinct even when they're playing the same note? Like a flute versus a cello?
Precisely.
Yeah.
So the frequency or the pitch is the same. But what's different is the quality of the sound. We call that the timbre.
Uh-huh.
And this is largely due to the shape and material of the instrument,
Okay.
which affects how complex that sound wave is.
So there's more to a sound wave than just frequency.
Absolutely. There's also wavelength, which is just the distance between 2 peaks of a wave.
Okay.
The shorter the wavelength, the higher the frequency. And there's also amplitude.
Okay. And so how does that relate to loudness?
So amplitude is basically how much energy a sound wave is carrying.
Oh, okay.
The higher the amplitude, the more intensely those air molecules are vibrating.
Okay.
And the louder the sound that we perceive.
Okay.
And we measure that in decibels.
Decibels. Yeah, I've heard of that. especially when it comes to like really loud concerts.
Exactly. So a whisper might be around 30 decibels.
Okay.
A normal conversation around 60. But a rock concert can reach up to 120 decibels, which is actually getting close to the threshold of pain for humans.
Yeah.
And it's really important to be mindful of loud noises because prolonged exposure to anything above 85 decibels can damage those little hair cells in your ear,
Oh, wow.
which can actually lead to hearing loss.
Okay. I did not know that that's good to know.
Yeah.
So I guess we've got these sound waves zipping through the air, carrying all this information about pitch quality, loudness.
Right.
But how does all of that get translated into something our brains can understand?
Well, that's where the amazing design of the human ear comes into play.
Yeah.
It acts like a finely tuned instrument, capturing, amplifying, and then converting those sound waves into electrical signals that our brain can actually interpret.
Wow. And I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty of how our ears actually, process all that.
Okay.
Where do we even begin with such a complex system?
Let's start with the part we can all see, the outer ear, that curved structure that you can feel when you tug on your earlobe.
Uh-huh.
It's called the pinna. And it acts like a funnel, collecting those sound waves and channeling them into the ear canal.
So the pinna is kind of like a satellite dish for sound?
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
But it actually does more than just collect sound waves. The shape of the pinna helps us figure out where sounds are coming from.
Yeah.
So the way the waves bounce off those curves and folds gives our brain clues about the location of a sound.
I never would have thought that the shape of my ear was helping me pinpoint where sounds are coming from.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So the sound waves travel down the ear canal,
Right.
and then...
They hit the eardrum.
Okay.
This is a thin, sensitive membrane that vibrates in response to those sound waves.
So like the head of a drum.
Exactly like a drum head.
Okay. Yeah.
The louder the sound, the more intensely the eardrum's going to vibrate.
Okay, so far so good. But how do those vibrations actually get translated into something that our brain can understand?
That's where the middle ear comes in.
Okay.
So behind the eardrum, there's this chain of 3 tiny bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, but they have the much cooler names of the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup.
Okay, that's much easier to remember.
Yeah.
I'm guessing they do more than just kind of hang out in our middle ear.
Oh, they're definitely hard workers.
Okay.
These little bones act as a lever system, amplifying those vibrations from the eardrum and transmitting them to the inner ear.
Okay.
And here's a fun fact for you. The stapes, that last little bone in the chain, is actually the smallest bone in the entire human body.
Wow, I did not know that.
It's tiny.
That's amazing that such a tiny structure plays such a vital role in our hearing.
And that amplification is really important because the inner ear is filled with fluid,
Right.
which is much denser than air.
Okay.
So it needs that extra boost.
Okay, so we've reached the inner ear.
Yes.
What happens to those amplified vibrations now?
The inner ear is home to the cochlea.
Okay.
This is a spiral-shaped, fluid-filled structure. This is basically the heart of hearing. When those vibrations from the stapes reach the oval window, which is a membrane, at the entrance to the cochlea, they set off waves in that fluid inside.
So I'm picturing like ripples in a pond.
Exactly like ripples. And lining the inside of the cochlea are these thousands of tiny hair cells, each one tuned to a specific frequency.
Wow.
Like a microscopic orchestra.
That's incredible.
I know, right?
Okay.
And so when those fluid waves pass by, they cause those hair cells to bend. And that bending action is what converts those mechanical vibrations into electrical signals.
So it's these tiny hair cells that are responsible for turning sound into something that our brains can understand?
That's exactly right. And those electrical signals then travel along the auditory nerve
Okay.
to the brain, where they're decoded and interpreted.
Okay, so the human ear really is like a marvel of engineering.
Oh, it absolutely is.
It's mind-boggling to think about how such a complex process happens, without us even having to think about it.
It really is remarkable.
But the journey doesn't end there.
Nope.
I mean, we followed these sound waves from the outer ear through the middle ear to the inner ear,
Right.
where they're converted into those electrical signals. But now what happens when those signals reach the brain?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
How does the brain transform those raw impulses into the meaningful sounds that we experience?
I've been waiting for this part.
I know, right?
It's one thing to capture the sound, but it's a whole other level to make sense of it all.
Right.
So I'm ready to dive into the world of the brain and how it processes sound.
All right, then. Let's continue our journey into the command center, the brain.
The brain. So what happens next? I mean, how does our brain take those electrical impulses and turn them into, like, the sounds that we experience.
This is where things get really, really interesting.
Okay.
So those signals are traveling along the auditory nerve, right? And they arrive at this place called the auditory cortex,
Okay.
which is a specialized region in the temporal lobe of the brain.
Okay.
And this is where sound really comes to life.
Okay.
It's not just detecting sounds anymore.
Right.
It's about recognizing patterns,
Okay.
identifying melodies, understanding speech, even responding emotionally to what we hear.
So it's like the auditory cortex is kind of like the conductor of an orchestra, right?
Yeah.
Taking all those individual notes and shaping them into something. A symphony of sound.
I like that analogy.
Okay.
So one of the amazing things the auditory cortex does is it decodes complex sounds like speech.
Uh-huh.
It breaks down those incoming signals, identifies these things called phonemes,
Okay.
which are like the basic building blocks of words,
Okay.
and then pieces them together, allowing us to understand the meaning of what we're hearing.
It's incredible how our brains do all this without us even having to think about it.
It's pretty amazing.
It really makes you realize how much processing power is going on
Yeah.
behind the scenes.
All the time.
All the time. Yeah. Okay. So, and it doesn't stop there.
It does not.
What about sound localization? Like, our ability to pinpoint exactly where a sound is coming from,
Yeah.
how does our brain figure that out?
That is another remarkable feat of the auditory cortex.
Okay, so, I mean, we have 2 years, obviously.
Yeah.
But how do we go from that to knowing where a sound originated?
Well, it all comes down to some very clever processing of the subtle differences in how sound reaches each ear. So when a sound comes from, say, your left side,
Okay.
it's going to reach your left ear a tiny fraction of a second before it reaches your right ear.
Okay, and I'm guessing it's probably slightly louder in the left ear as well.
You got it.
Okay.
So the brain takes those tiny differences in timing and intensity and uses them to triangulate the location.
So it's kind of like a built-in sonar system?
Exactly like a sonar system.
Wow. Okay. But we've been talking a lot about how humans perceive sound.
Right.
What about, like, the rest of the animal kingdom? I mean, I imagine there's a lot of diversity out there when it comes to hearing.
Oh, absolutely. The animal kingdom is full of diverse auditory adaptations.
Okay.
Evolution has shaped the hearing of each species to suit its environment and its lifestyle.
So, like those bats we talked about before using echolocation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bats emit those high-frequency sounds, often beyond the range of human hearing.
Right.
And then they analyze the echoes bouncing back to create a sonic map of their surroundings.
So they're basically seeing with sound.
They're seeing with sound, and they're not alone. Dolphins and whales use echolocation, too, to navigate, hunt, and even communicate underwater.
Wow, that's amazing. So different animals have evolved to use different frequencies of sound then
Right.
depending on their needs.
Exactly.
What about animals that live in environments where sound doesn't travel as easily, like underground?
Well, animals that live underground have developed incredible ways to sense vibrations through the ground.
Okay.
Moles, for instance, have super-sensitive touch receptors
Okay.
in their snouts and paws that can detect the faintest tremors.
So they're kind of hearing through their sense of touch.
Yeah, in a way they are.
It's remarkable how adaptable nature can be.
It really is, and it kind of makes you wonder if we could experience the world through the ears of a bat or a whale.
Right.
What would we perceive? What sounds would fill our world?
That is a mind-blowing thought. I mean, it really puts our own sense of hearing into perspective.
Absolutely. We're just privy to this small slice of the vast journey through the world of sound, from the physics of waves to the workings of our ears and the brain.
Yeah.
Really highlights the power of sound to connect us to the world around us, to each other, and to the vast web of life.
I love that. Well said. So next time we hear birds singing, a dog barking, or even the gentle hum of the wind,
Yeah.
let's all take a moment to appreciate the symphony of sound that's always playing out around us.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive.
It was my pleasure.